Hi, everybody. Welcome to this chit chat series. So the Tech Chit Chat is like a series of hanging out with the community organized by 𝗧𝗵𝗶.
Hello.
Hi.
So I'm really happy. It's like to find out like my friends since a long time to like hanging out with me like some virtual meeting, but physically I think the last time that Andres is very Moroccan, 𝗵𝗶𝗁 Morocco like hoodie. It's like I think we had the privilege to meet before just the lockdown at 𝗬𝗏𝗏 and 𝗵𝗶𝗁 Hawaii, right? Yeah. Marcus, I think, is back to 𝗵𝗶𝗁 Morocco and just long. Welcome, my friends, to this like special series to talk a little bit, about Java, celebrating like 25 years of Java, right? So I will let Josh, you go first. Like introduce yourself. Yeah.
Huh?
Introduce yourself to the audience.
Oh, hi. I'm sorry. My name is Josh. Nice to meet you. I'm friends with these people. These wonderful people.
Nice. I can do that better. So I'm Marcus. I'm from Germany. So this is the weird accent you're hearing. And I'm also friends with these people.
Are you really?
I guess so. Come on. I haven't talked to you in a while, but that's fair. But yeah, it's been what, more than 1.5 years? I guess so, right? So
yeah. So I miss all of you guys. It's been a long time since we have been in the same room together. So my name is Andres. I'm from Mexico and currently broadcasting from Switzerland. So I'm closer to Marcus than to Badr and Josh right now.
Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, let me put it this way: it's like as we are celebrating like 25 years of Java, as we said, like all of us are friends, and I think at least we have met more than 10 years. But let's go back, like for every one of us, what was like his first experience with Java, and what was like his because all of us we are like falling in love with Java. So what was the love story about Java?
who want to go first? I do have a story, so if you guys don't want to jump in,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, this is easy. So I'm technically not even a programmer because I started out in graphic design. And after my mandatory military time in Germany, I started studying a lot like pre-press stuff, getting real stuff out of the computer onto like newspapers and magazines and like doing the complete post-productions on the printing side. And during that time, I started, I kind of found out that there is something new out there, which is called the internet. And turns out developing websites and putting like fancy graphics into the internet is also kind of like media and press. And so I kind of wrapped my head around how to do this. And everybody was totally blown away because I was one of the first people who had like an actual 8 subnet mapped through my ISDN router to my home. And I actually ran like my own domains. Where was that even? Like end of 1990s, maybe. So this is where Perl came up, right? So server-side programming was all basically CGI stuff in Perl. And I followed this path like media and prepress for exactly 1 day after I finished like the official stuff. And I straightly jumped into studying information technology in Munich. And that was kind of insanely boring because there was so much mathematics. There was so many things that really did not like even a single bit of programming actually occurred during the first couple of semesters. And I'm like, I'm bored to hell. I was working more on my private side and learning less. And this is where I started my first job as a web developer. And my first contact with Java actually were servlets, and somewhat servlets because it's been called Fusion Markup Language. On Macromedia's called Fusion Server, which by the time back in the days, like 120 moons ago, even more. Anyway, that was all based on Java, Enterprise Java, J2E, or whatever they called it back in the days. I mean, it was just a servlet engine, so let's not make it worse. But yeah, that was my first contact. And I basically straightly jumped into be a WebLogic server, container managed persistence. ended with the first bigger contracts where I started to be like a web developer, had to learn how to wire JSP pages into like backend logic. And I personally worked my way from the web all the way to the backend on the Java specification side. And yeah, that was back in the days when a famous guy, what's his name? Rod Johnson, basically came up with a mission to make enterprise Java more easily consumable and usable, right? So this is like the first days of spring. So this is where I started my Java career, like literally at the very beginning where all this shit started.
Yeah, that's really inspiring. I mean, even for the young generation now, because like you know, we know how people need software developer at this time with the digital era, and everybody want to like build stuff in house, and you know all the story behind. But it's like back in your time, it was like it's not easy like to think to switch completely, as you said, like for some business who need, or some field who need like some logic, mathematics, etc., and your background was completely designed. And we see like today Marcus is one of the, even if you see all the tweets of the most influential Java person, and that's like, yeah, that's you are my friend and we've been hanging out, but I didn't really know this real love story, because it's like, yeah, it's so inspiring.
Yeah. There's more secrets. So the first business application that I wrote was a vacuum cleaner finder, like for a German company. And you basically need to put like these bags into vacuum cleaners, right? At least the older models. And because there's so many different variants of these bags, you basically had to build like a finder where you could put in the specs of your vacuum cleaner, and you end up with like the selection of bags you could buy. So that's been my personal first business project that I ever worked on. Sounds stupid, but guess what? We all started small, right? So, and yes, this is almost half a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Well, in my case, I have kind of like a similar story. I do remember when Java came out 26 years ago, because I was working at that time at a computer lab while I was still in college. And suddenly, abruptly, the manager of the lab opened the door and said, "Stop what you're doing. From now on, you're going to code in Java." At the time, we were just learning C, not even C++. And we thought, well, that person is crazy, right? We didn't pay him much attention that particular day. This was May 23rd, 1995. A few months passed, and I was in the next semester, I had to learn multiple languages. So that was Lisp and Prolog and C++. And I had still mental scars of using C. And I just didn't want to get into C++, because the moment that we saw that all the concepts that you needed to learn to create an application, I was like, no. And I remember about Java. So I immediately went to the college library and looked for any books in Java. And the only one that I could find was Java in a Nutshell by David Flanagan, the first edition. It was just a really tiny book. If you look at it right now, the Tiger book is really, really big. But back in the day, with Java 1.0, it was small and very easy to digest. So I taught myself Java in a couple of days. And I convinced my CS professor, the person that was teaching us different computer languages at that particular subject, instead of delivering my project using C++, that I will use Java. He said, "Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, he's a teacher; he should know how to do things." And of course, he learned Java as well. So I wrote my first UI with Java using AW3 and threads, and that's exactly what blew me away. Because if you wanted to do multi-threading applications in C++, back in the day, 26 years ago, it was crazy. But in Java, in comparison, it was that simple. And from that point onward, I just kept going with Java, and the rest of my class kept going with C and C++. So I was the weird guy because I loved Java, and everybody else was doing C++. Many years later, most of them are doing Java, and only a handful of them are doing C++. And just like like Marcus, I remember the early days of enterprise Java and JSPs. I do remember working with one of the earliest application servers that were not per se J2EE. This is called Enhydra. This is JSPs before all the other standards came to be. It was terrible, but it was better than the alternatives. And I think,
yeah, you guys have too much like a longer story than me at least, and I think Josh also. But really just because like we are same generation. I can go with myself. Is like I had like study for the engineering school, and everything like was for the practical stuff for programming, algorithm, everything was in C. But I started like challenging myself, and with Faisal, because he was like also we studied together, and the story started. He's this friendship till like building 𝗵𝗵, DevOps, etc. But yeah, we decided like we saw like it's trendy and Java is like fancy, etc. And we started to rebuild everything in Java. And in my second year of studies, back to 2005, I built like a mobile app in G2ME. So, and back in that time, there was like kind of no Android, no iPhone, and the Nokia was like the best phone at that time. And building an app, like deploying it, is like you feel the joy of developer and like it kind of like go into production in your own device. I was like, yeah, that was like so much fun. And then I decided like to continue all my career in Java, and was like, yeah, we would be discussing about the community and love how like the community help each other, kind of family, and we start like building stuff the same way here in the country with the goal for African developer, etc. But yeah, my story is like it's like early, it's like still like back 15, 16 years now. But yeah, Josh, what about you?
Oh, so okay. My starting with Java versus liking Java are different. I learned.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, like, I learned Java in the 90s at the same time as I was learning Python 1.5. So Python 1.5 came out in 98. So I was already comfortable with Java at that point. But if I'm honest, I had only ever known C and some other less glamorous languages. So I was learning Java. I didn't really understand object orientation. I didn't understand why you would do things this way, right? I was writing imperative code. And so then in 2001, long story short, but I ended up in the south of France in it was not a chateau. It was the residence where the servants for the castle would have lived, but it wasn't the castle. It was like a separate residence just for the servants, right? A big, big place. And I had some people that I knew that owned half of that. They had bought it as a country home or whatever. And so there I am in the south of France sitting there, and I'm just there to like, help out. I'm not really, I have no idea how I got to be there. And one of the people that was there, one of the people that owned the place, was a former professor of computer science at a university here in California. He had retired. He was emeritus, right? And so I'm sitting there amid all of his great books. And there's this book by a guy named Bruce Eckel called Thinking in Java, the first edition, right? And I just picked up that book, and I'm like, it was not just, here's how to do this in Java. It was why you would do it in Java, and it was contextualized against why they did things in C++. And it was a lesson in object orientation and all these sort of other things, as opposed to just a syntax. And that really helped me kind of change the way I thought about it. And I came back to Java with an appreciation of that. And then the other thing is that's the first time I was ever able to like really think about building user interfaces, or because I was already using Windows, and I had access to a Mac, and I knew I wanted to use more Linux. And so the idea of writing C++ network apps or user interfaces was just never, it's not a thing. You don't want to do that, right? You do networking coding with C++, you have to figure it out 3 different times. So, or at least back then, right? It was a nightmare. So I just really took off. I just really liked Java. It just appealed to me. And so I love that book so much that if you look at the second edition of that book, in the user comments, the letters from the people that liked it, there's a letter from a guy named Josh Long with the I own the domain starbucksman.com, back. I still own it, but it says @JoshLong@StarbucksMan.com. So that it appeared in the second edition of that book, which I think came out in 2002. And it was, that was it. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, I was using Java, before that, and I kind of had done all the sort of basics, introductory stuff. But finally, 2002, here we are. I'm gonna go ahead and like find work doing this, and to make it official, I'm gonna get Sun Certified Java Programmer certification, and I did, and I got it, and nobody ever has asked me about this. 0 people have ever cared that I had that certification. So I just want that to be a lesson to people that it has done me 0 benefit in my life ever. I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to like even show the certification anymore, because it's got a time limit. When you get it, you're not allowed to just continue saying you're certified with Java. You're only certified for that version for so many years, whatever. So it's actually a liability. I'm not even sure if I can get in trouble by mentioning that I was certified. I guess that's the moral of the story here: is don't get certified, or do, but it's not going to help you in any way. Anyway, that was it. So Java in the like 1998. That's when I learned it. 2001 is when I fell in love with it. Right, that's the difference. And what a ride, And that was the same time as Python. I've been doing Python for as long as I have with Java. I don't know if people appreciate that about me. And to me, Python always felt like the thing you kept in your pocket when you needed to get something done quickly. Like if I wanted to do a slightly more impressive bash script, I'd use Python. But if you wanted to do anything at scale, you use Java. And I loved Bruce Eccles' version of Java because he made it seem like anything was possible. But then you get into industry, and it's like, here, take your business logic and deploy it into this HTTP server, which is, it's just always seemed really stupid to me. Okay, let's suppose that the prevailing technology with which we all did our interactions on the internet wasn't HTTP. Let's suppose it was FTP, or Gopher, or whatever, okay? For some reason, the internet was born, and there's a whole ecosystem around Gopher or FTP instead of HTTP, okay? What if I said today in 2021, in order for you to deploy your business logic, you need to deploy it into this Gopher-let container? It just seems completely orthogonal. What does my business logic have to do with the protocol I'm using to expose it? And yet that's what we did for decades. It was just this HTTP server is the beating heart of our business logic. And then
mainframes.
Oh, yeah.
Josh, there's so many things you deploy shit to.
Yeah, but that's a runtime, not a network protocol. It just seems backwards. So the fact that we're beyond that, we got that, we're now at least back to, we're at the point where now it's just a naked public static void main sitting inside of a virtual machine, sitting inside of software, sitting inside of a process space, sitting inside of the operating system, sitting inside virtual hardware, sitting inside actual hardware. Now we're close to the middle, That last extra bit of interaction, that was the bridge too far, Way too weird. But anyway, that's my story.
As you said, like Python is like good for scripting, maybe for data. It's like every language have its power. It's not that we are not like discussion like Java is like the best or whatever, but everybody have his own vision about the languages. But there is like some advantages, like if you work with Java, it's like you are dealing with the whole ecosystem. And if you see like today application, the cloud native application, I think like Java is one of the most evolving ecosystem in this space. And you see like Marcus with his like Quarkus head, like Josh Law, Spring Boot, everything. So it's like in this, what do you think, guys, about like the power of Java as being like updated? Because like there is the Java language, the Java ecosystem, because like this is also like this part. How do you think, guys, the Java ecosystem is evolving generally, without even talking about Java 16, the release cadence, etc., but generally about the ecosystem, talking cloud, big data, now SQL, wherever? And I think from my experience, because even in the company, like our main expertise and strategy Java, and we find out ourselves, we've been doing everything. So building everything is possible with Java, mainly in the era of cloud native. So it's like, what do you think, guys?
Well, I love a quote from Eugene Sirana, which is a guy that I met. The first time that I met Josh Long was close to 11 years ago in Dublin, Ireland. We met at a conference, and Eugene was there, and he said something like along the lines that if you can think of it, then there's a jar for it. That's how big the Java ecosystem is. So no matter what it is, there's bound to be some sort of Java interoperability. Sometimes it's really good. Sometimes it's above average or could have a little bit of work. But there's always some sort of Java code that you can talk to in case that, in order to make that particular use case work.
That's 100%.
Yeah, that's also like the JVM parts. If you love even Python, you can do some Jython. If you do like Ruby, you do like gRuby, and that's also like some infinite possibilities that other ecosystem don't have, I think.
So let's spice this up a little bit, because I have opinions. I do strongly believe that the success of Java is mostly because it supports a high quality software project that might actually have hundreds of team members. So it has a decent packaging mechanism. It has like modularization, and I'm not even talking about latest and greatest shenanigans, but ultimately there's always been something that supported the traditional waterfall-driven multi-project support stuff that's required if you run a project for like more than 200 software developers. And I think just looking at Jacoco or other quality assurance tools like PMD, whatever you name them, all this has fueled a complete industry and set like standards across the board.
By the way, sorry to interrupt, saying Jacoco, there is Mark saying hello to you guys.
Hi back.
Hello, Mark.
So ultimately, having a language that really supports all of this has been the biggest advantage. You could literally just pick heads and dump them from one project to the other. And there's been, like, as you said, a complete ecosystem of people thinking and breathing alike in this Java space in the broadest sense. Also, what really helped was the higher up platforms, right? So enterprise Java in the broadest sense. You mentioned J2ME, which wasn't exactly a success. But anyway, all this has also helped on standardizing these development efforts. And to a certain extent, at least for a while, even these high up platforms ultimately delivered. We had like more or less distributed systems. We had like our application service, clustering, support for like low-level hardware in terms of like cheap pizza boxes and God knows what, right? So it's been plenty of factors around the around why Java is so supportive of complex development projects. If we're thinking about the case that Josh mentioned earlier, like I just want to write a bash script, man, this is going to be a hell lot of effort if you're not looking for JBang or whatever, like something that is also brand new, right? And exactly touches on that problem. So good part is that might be something that helps you, but nobody would actually come up with the idea to start a bash script with Java in the first place, right? So there are kind of like usability limitations. And I do think, especially in a cloud native world with all these additional layers of indirection, just thinking of orchestration and containerization, like we're getting away from just the simple jar files. We're getting to more complex deployments that also open up possibilities for people to try out something else, right? So standardization doesn't necessarily happen anymore on the platform level. It might still happen on a runtime level, which could be a JVM or just a VM, like thinking about Graal, right? So I do believe that API knowledge in particular is something that is going to be more relevant when it comes to keeping development teams up to speed and on the same pace. And it will also be super interesting to witness how we build our applications in the future. So are we going to like make them even smaller, thinking about functions as services? Are we going to build systems out of functions or not? Are we sticking to microlith or microservices or whatever you call them, right? So all this is definitely going to have a big influence on the future of Java and adoption in general. And Java is doing great, right? I mean, there's been significant improvements when we're looking at how Java behaves inside of containers. There's definitely more stuff coming, like Java Flight Recorder for containers. We have GraalVM as a really fast way of starting up Java, at least most of it. So that's my take. So Java as an ecosystem is definitely under pressure, if you ask me, because it's so much easier to also include other languages. And think about like AI, machine learning, that's not necessarily Java's best play yet, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, it still has a decent appeal to companies using it because they know it can be safe, it can be secure, and it's standardized when we're looking at trainings and experiences, right? So you can actually compare what other programmers did in the past. So my take, it's going to be tough. So from here on, it's definitely not going to be an exponential growth if we just let it go without doing anything more. Challenge me.
No, I think that you made really good points, specifically in the case of machine learning and Python. One of the reasons, well, actually two main reasons why it's so popular. One is because, well, the people that write the algorithms, the scientists, they can map directly from their algorithms into Python. Much easier than to do that with Java syntax. So the Java syntax that we had back in 26 years ago, it was created in such a way that it's very close to C, because the vast majority of developers at the time knew C. So that way they could jump into the Java platform. But today, that is no longer the case. You have more people using JavaScript and Python and other languages that look completely different in terms of C-like syntax. So how can we get those people into our platform, into our ecosystem, if what the first thing that they're looking at is the syntax? I don't have an answer for that. I'm just saying is one of the things. And the other one is the libraries and the support that they have in order to run the computations they want. It's not about performance. It's about the ease of use. Because if it were performance, then those people will jump into the JVM immediately. Because the JVM is much better at running long-running computations and number crushing than everything else that is out there.
I think that the AI use case is interesting. Although technically, like we had, so again, the crown jewel of the Java ecosystem isn't the Java language, right? Like I think we can all agree on that. It's the JVM. That's the multi-billion-dollar piece of gold that for some reason Oracle's generous enough to give away for free, right? That's every day I'm just like, I can't believe we get to use this piece of software. Imagine if Oracle gave away thousands of Ferraris and we're just like, oh, fix it, Oracle, make it better. Here's a free, they're giving us free Ferraris and we're just like, no, make it better. You know, it's a Ferrari. It's amazing. It's the best piece of infrastructure on the planet. It's just ever, just amazing. So the JVM, I'm a big fan. Java, well, it's 26 years old. The language is inconsistent. It's a mess, right? Like look at languages that have done it better and more recently, and that's fine. And that's the nice thing about, like what you said, we can run those languages on the JVM. So they're not lost opportunities. They're just different syntax. That's fine. We did actually have the JVM in machine learning for a minute there. Do you remember Scala was a thing you could use with Spark? So
Scala, what?
Yeah, I know. Well, it's Scala's a nice language. It's really the new one's 3.0. Oh, really
You're breaking up.
Going through a tunnel.
You hear me?
Someone just unplugged Josh.
I don't know. Yeah, I used J2ME for a minute and a half, and there was a point. I forget. I'm desperately trying to remember. There was a thing that was popular that I used. It was an ANT-based post-processor, and basically it gave you macros for Java because you needed it. Because remember, j2me at the time had different profiles, right? Before we had them today, like you had a profile for like devices that didn't have floating point integers.
Was it Janet?
Maybe. Oh, this is 20 years ago.
Yeah.
CLDP,
This is before
CLDP.
25.
Yeah, MEDP, CLDP, I think, or something like that.
Yeah, there's that. And so there's
something like that. Yeah.
You actually had a macro system to make it so that you could write code that only compiled on these profiles, and it's just that's what C++ and C does. It's horrible, and yet the Java ecosystem solved it, right? I learned what was then called J2E. Obviously, it's a million times better now, but at the time, 20 years ago, J2E was hard for me to understand, right? It was it made me want to leave Java, right? And so I was actually, if Spring had not come along, I would have been a .NET developer because I could get a service and it all working really quickly, right? The whole point was easier. And so, you look at that and the ecosystem. So the ecosystem gave us macros for J2Me, which it's not great, but it's a solution to the problem that we had then. The ecosystem gave us things like Spring and Hibernate and whatever. So that's the other thing that's amazing about this ecosystem is it just keeps getting better and better and better. And it doesn't matter. Like there was a 5-6 year period when the Java project itself was moving a little slowly, right? Do you remember that? Like between Java 1.6 and Java 1.8, there was not a lot of movement there. And then at the time, my position was, I don't care because it's really, really good. And what I really care about is the ecosystem, and that isn't going away, right? That ecosystem is inspiring. You don't need much. It's already still faster than most other languages and runtimes at the time. So this ecosystem is amazing. And now here we are looking at, we just talked about machine learning, and there's Scala support for Spark, and you've got Android now. That again, this is all stuff that's not coming from the core Java team, but that's solving problems for everybody, right? Like you can't deny that Java has succeeded. I mean, look at Android. I can't believe there's 3 billion Android devices out there, right? And what was the number? There's like billion J2Me devices at one point. That was the number we were told, right? So I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. I mean, and the other hand is there are some things that actually didn't succeed that I will always feel a little sad about, like Java Spaces, pour one out for Java Spaces, things like that. I'm just told struts. My goodness, the Java on the server side, we had Model 2 MVC, regular JSPs, and just like somebody wrote their own controller, and then struts came along, and that was a big deal. I mean, that actually brought to my mind, that made it so that you could do Java on the server side and not be crazy. There was actually a way to do it quickly. It wasn't like super quick. And Rails came along and it made it look like it was utterly irrelevant. It made struts look utterly irrelevant. But at the time, I remember being super impressed. I mean, anyway.
Struts is actually the reason I gave my first internal presentation, because everybody had to learn it. So it was brand new and it solved a lot of problems and we all loved it. So we really needed to skill up a couple of people because that's so much different. And I constantly keep smiling when you talk about like the past because memories come to mind. So you've been struggling with container managed persistence and like the madness of J2E, whatever it's been called. Like there was Together Control Center back in the days from Borland, and they basically had like a plugin which lets you model your entity relationships with these CMPs, and it completely generated your complete persistence EJB based. So we've been fighting this tool for a living for many, many months, and it never really worked. And the same we did with Spring JPA stuff back in the days, because we also wanted to have like the repository pattern in a reasonable way. And that was a little bit later, but still we had like enterprise architect and like some magic behind that to take these models and just create all of this, like literally throw it out. And that was amazing. Like just thinking about what we did from a model driven perspective and how much the industry actually evolved to the day, like as today, where we have a reasonable set of annotations and a certain clarity in APIs that lets everybody just do simple things in an easy fashion, straightforward, right, without even thinking about it. So
or
we had a
things at all. That's the thing. Can I do a desktop user interface today in Java? Yeah, JavaFX is pretty amazing.
it's not bundled, right? So it depends on the distribution. This is where the trouble starts.
Well, neither is Spring. That's the thing. Like, it doesn't have
Kind of, yeah. So yes, yeah, that's one of the things that people complain is that JavaFX is not part of the JDK. JavaFX is no longer part of Java. Well, that's not true. It was never part of Java. It was part of the Oracle binary distribution of Oracle JDK from Java 7 up to Java 11. It has never been part of the Java SE specification. So technically, it has never been part of what we know Java standard specification, right?
But it always has been part of the one thing that we thought is the Java distribution to
and that's
choose,
the thing that
right?
has changed. So there have been many JDK vendors for quite some time, and Oracle has been the biggest for quite some time, right? And they decided to bundle the JavaFX binary with their JDK binary. That way, like Marcus said, it will make much easier for people to build these kind of applications because there is no additional download that you have to think of. There is nothing extra you have to do. It's just there. Nowadays, there are other JDK vendors that continue to bundle JavaFX to give you that ease of use. So you select one distribution or the other, you get JavaFX or you don't. And so you have to do an extra download for the additional binary bits. That's the way. And then I think that happened in JavaFX 11 or 12. The binaries are now posted as jars in Maven Central. So you can now consume JavaFX like every other single dependency that you can do, like Spring, Quarkus, Hibernate, everything just works because Marcus mentioned we have a sound package manager. It is not the best. It has issues, but it works.
Yeah. And although it is a little funny today, it's amazing, but also a little funny. Have you ever done SDK list Java? Like SDK manager? Just do SDK list Java and you get like 100,000 different JDKs you can download today. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Feels like it's a good thing, but I'm not sure. I don't have you look at the Python ecosystem, you look at like JavaScript. Well, no. There's only a few JavaScript runtimes because that doesn't make a lot of sense because a lot of times it's in the browser, otherwise it's Node. But in the Java ecosystem, we have so many distributions of the Java runtime itself. So getting these things as small as possible and making it so I can layer on capabilities like native images, like JavaFX, whatever, that feels really good. I'm really glad we're at that place. And, you know, it's taken a minute, but we're here. It's amazing.
Yeah, Adoptium is also going to be the place, right? So, I mean, I've always been a big fan of the Adopt OpenJDK project, which literally burned community engagement in minutes to provide something that is usable and in a kind of like single-stop fashion. And now that this project initiative basically moved over to the Eclipse Foundation, it has like an official umbrella. And just a couple of days ago, I talked to one of the project leads for their quality insurance initiative. It's called 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, which is also a booze in Germany. So don't mix that up. But
That's an absinthe, right?
What?
Is that an absinthe?
No, it's a clear booze. I don't know. They ship it around the world before like it gets bottled. But anyway, so long story short, this is basically a quality insurance method for various binary builds. So there'll be a lot more different flavors and versions of the JVM being available through the Adoptium project going forward. And they are all like, they are on a really good path. Like I don't remember the number of tests they are running per each build they are doing, but it's like in the hours, literally 17 hours to run a complete test suite against a JVM. So that is amazing. Yeah. So there's still a lot of like quality stuff happening behind, and it's not that the user actually has to pick a vendor actively, because there's still a lot of really good places to go where we can be safe and get like something that is quality insured and good.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me the best thing that Oracle did, once both Sun is like to put like the OpenJDK as a reference implementation. Even there's like some Delta source code that was like proper for Sun, and then but back to the time as we've been discussing, like the release cadence was like very slow, and there was like no features. Like when Java 5 came, there was like annotation generics. It's like it's empowered even the EE space to have like EGB3 and so like with annotation, because as Marcus said, like to deploy in EGB2 with the descriptors and stuff, you need like to be a super ninja. And then you have like a slow, and then we didn't get like Java 7 was like only language and some like project coin and stuff. Java 8 again, Java 9 was like modularity, and this is like when even the Java space or EE space with the standardization. And then I'm gonna click on Josh who's talking. Standardization is like make slow the evolution. It's good like to have a common stuff, but the standardization make it like slow for the EE space to keep like alive. And where we saw now like the Spring Boot ecosystem like make the real replacement for all developers, and they can understand just when he said like if there was no Spring, he could be a .NET developer. So, but all these things, even like for the mobile. G2ME before even Android came, so it's like Java has been designed first for embedded devices, right? And didn't like make it even like before the first release, and then the applet came, then the people went to the mobile, and the way with the applet became the nightmare. It's like how there is the ecosystem, but like it's like more a question for Andres, like you are working with Oracle, but I think as like Eclipse Foundation now, like the EE has been donated without TCK, without with some lawyer and stuff. It's like make it really slow for the EE space and lose the lip. And in the cloud native, there is GraalVM. We are all know that the GVM and the ecosystem is evolving, but the standardization part, even like it's could be even a question, even with the release cadence for 6 months, if it's still like relevant. What is the best feature like we got like since Java 11 or whatever? So, but even for modularity like Jigsaw projects, I do remember when EE6 came here, that was the OSGI, and OSGI helped like to make all the app server like fast and amazing, starting in a couple of seconds. So yeah. So my question is about mainly standardization and what's the future, even with the release cadences with 6 months.
Well, so the thing is that their standardization happens through the JCP, the Java Community Process.
Yeah.
And that continues to work since its inception. It's been what? The JCP is, I want to say it's 21 or 22 years old now. 22 years old, I believe, this year. And the Java standard, so what we know as Java SE, the Java that we love and use every day, it's standardized to a JSR, which is part of the things that the JCP does. So what's going to happen and will continue to happen since JDK 10 is that every 6 months, a new JSR collects all the features and bug fixes that would like to go into the next version. Now, all the JDK vendors, or whoever has joined the OpenJDK project, anybody can do it. Of course, you have to have the chops, the technical chops in order to contribute code, and there is not as easy as, oh, I want to join the OpenJDK today, but it's not really that hard as well. It takes some time, but pretty much anybody, if they have the interest, can join OpenJDK and start making small contributions. And as time passes by, I don't know, you might get to get a bigger chunk on your plate. And that's what happens today. You had all these people working. Oracle perhaps is the contributor right now, and everything happens on the watching eye of the JCP and the OpenJDK project.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think it's super important, in particular now that Oracle thankfully embraced community support even more and open source principles in general. We are looking at different platforms, right? So there's what we call the JVM, the core language with all the features, which is in very good hands. Andres, when did the release cadence change? Is that like 2 years ago? I don't even know. Like we went from literally a couple of releases per decade to one every half a year. So there is an insane pace of innovation if we just look at the VM and the language itself. It's small bytes, and we can probably fill another hour just talking about this tangent field. But let's just check this off and totally testify that we do get a significant amount of new features, and Java has not been as up-to-date as it is right now since ever. So I can't ask for anything more with regards to speed. Looking at the higher level platforms, and particularly what's now called Jakarta EE, which is completely, I'm tempted to say owned, which is wrong. It is owned by the community, by the Eclipse Foundation. So there's a lot of like legal stuff that's not really relevant for the community in general, at least not if you want to start working with it. But ultimately, this is also like the APIs for server-side development, right? So there has been a significant delay in releasing new versions, even if we've now seen Jakarta EE9 out the door. It is not a feature release. It is more like trying to swallow name changes and release processes. And I think that's kind of the growing pain, if you want to, because ultimately it basically switched vendors, right? So we went from Oracle proprietary standardized to a full-blown open source project with many, many people involved. So also, let's check this off for now and wish all of the contributors the best for the upcoming releases, which I'm pretty sure will be pretty impressive and amazing. Let's also not forget Jakarta EE's success, or even Java EE's success, is built on the foundation of something that is stable and reliable. So it's somewhat the innovator's dilemma that we're talking about, because on the one hand, we want as many people adopting stable and non-changing technologies and APIs, and we also want innovation, right? So famous Ford quote about, what do your customers want? Faster horses? No, they don't. They want cars, right? So there is some kind of tension in that playing field, because obviously, in particular looking at cloud native development, centralized application server based might not be the solution anymore, like as the standard way of doing things, right? So I do expect a lot more to come out of Jakarta EE, and also out of Microprofile, which is another kind of group of like-minded people who are trying to come up with applied knowledge from the field about distributed applications and how we build modern cloud native applications with enterprise Java components and APIs that are well known and established, right? So there's a lot of things going on. The complete community is literally vibrant. It's just not that there's a release every other day. And I'm personally thankful for that, because we're already releasing too fast, and particularly on the language and JVM side. So, but that's only my personal take.
Yeah. Josh?
Huh?
You have any addition?
He fell asleep, sorry.
Yeah.
I nothing to add. I saw Jakarta EE10 will release. Well, they're going to remove JSP from JSF, and I was excited about that. And Spring Boot supports the Jakarta namespaces, so
that is actually cool.
Yeah, you can already use it there if you are using those things. I haven't used a Jakarta API or Java EE API in years and years, so I don't know.
So the last time I'd actually been together with me, because we've done that Spring versus Java EE shootout for O'Reilly Software Architecture in New York. Remember? Like those were the days. Yeah, years ago. So
yeah, out there. It's cool.
What I personally do strongly feel about is actually API knowledge. So I don't care about implementation. Just think about Quarkus, right? So we have a handful of wrappers around Spring APIs. It's not around libraries. We're not pulling in Spring or anything, but we're giving our users the opportunity to use a third-party kind of API to reach what they want to reach on top of Quarkus, right? And I do believe that the enterprise Java, Jakarta-E, whatever you call them, APIs in general have a broad mind share among developers. So this is what I value highly. And I do absolutely love the way that Spring, that Quarkus are using somewhat similar concepts to keep that knowledge alive and try to like get people onto the next steps in their career, if that makes sense, and if it's not like too many big words, but trying to navigate deep waters here. So
yeah, we've seen Quarkus and Micronaut and who was the other one that was doing it? They're all trying to emulate support for Spring apps and Spring APIs, and of course it doesn't actually work all the time, so we get bug reports and things like that. But it's actually very interesting to see that become a kind of a portable layer at this point, which is
it's not even meant as that, right? So don't get that wrong ever, because it's meant as like a getting started help. Right. So basically a copy and paste, for example. So it's really helping people to get started with the concepts that we have, and it's not a full-blown implementation by no means, right? So it's just a fraction.
Yeah, I think people are not confused about that. I'm not, but that in turn, like the Spring annotation component model thing itself owes to other things that came before, right? So it's just a very interesting sort of, I don't know. There's a lineage here, a long lineage of interesting things that have happened in the last 20-odd years. We had at transactional in Spring. And who knew that would be such a big thing later on? This component-centric, annotation-centric approach. Yeah,
that is true. That is true. And yes, it's Helidon, right, Andres? I think.
Yeah, Helidon is the other one.
Oh dear, haven't even tried that one.
Well, give it a try today. You'll be surprised.
I should. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I won't. I'm just saying I just haven't done it yet. It's on the list. It's such an amazing ecosystem.
That's one of the things that is really great about the Java ecosystem, is that we have no shortage of choices for pretty much everything. There is not a single project that tackles one aspect. You always have more than one. And the idea is that, well, you get this this little bit of competition within one another. That do I add this particular feature? Do I implement it in a different way that gives you either a bit of performance, speed, some other advantage over the other project? And there's always cross-pollination, but just like Marcus and Josh said, Quarkus and Spring are competitors in some areas, but they can also interact in others, the same way as Micronaut. There's one way that one framework can support the other in terms of migration, or in terms of, I do reactive in this way, and the other tool will simply say, oh, that's interesting, but I'm going to implement it in my own way. And that's how things happen.
And the fun part is, like, the three of us on a call together, like speaking bluntly and openly about technologies and how they interact. It's also a good example of how the community works, right? So I love this kind of open embracing, and I wouldn't even call it competition, because here's my take. I've been an architect, or at least had a business card that said architect for a couple of years. And I have to admit that the basic qualities of an architect should definitely be making the right decisions based on functional and non-functional requirements. So ultimately, a one-on-one feature comparison rarely gets you there. You definitely need to understand what the individual strengths and weaknesses of different approaches are. And I think this is another burden that has definitely been put on the new DevOps team, because we don't have that one architect that knows it all anymore, but also puts every developer in the spot to make the right decisions and being well informed about the different opportunities you have, right? And that is the one particular thing that definitely got worse with choice, because now you have to know more. Now you really need to up your game and make sure that you're going to all these amazing conferences, including Devoxx Morocco, learn your share of new technologies and make sure you're always at least in a position where you can make educated choices, which is something that I really strongly encourage everybody to do, and not just like bash other technologies, because that's not worth it.
That's a really good advice. If you get, somehow, for those people that are listening to us, if you get stuck with a particular technology, just look at another one and see if that other technology can help you solve the problem that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like talking about these advices. You guys have some advices. You've been here and you loved like the atmosphere and you know the developer spirit in the country and in Africa. Do you have some other advices like for young people here?
You mean to get started, or what? Or just
yeah, no, it's like mainly young to get started, like with the coding and like being excellent in what they do, and like as all of us like started from zero, right?
Oh yeah, I mean I can just tell you the same thing that everybody's always said, which is if you don't mind the personalities, you should definitely get into open source. There's the best, the fastest, or the much more painful.
Fastest.
Well, the only thing that I've found that's faster than open source is a startup, but that can be very, very traumatizing. So maybe you want to avoid that. Go to work in open source. You can work with some of the best out there, learn from them. You know, all the Spring projects we have. You know, I don't know. We have a huge team, like lots and lots of people. There, you go to spring.io/team. All these people work full time on open source. We want to help. We have a bunch of issues on GitHub that say open for. You know, ideal for contribution or ideal for novices or whatever. So we're trying to encourage people to find those GitHub issues that are tagged in this way. And if they say, hey, I'm starting, I want to make my first commit, somebody on the Spring team will help you. And you can work with people that are out there, and lots of open source projects, not just us, of course, obviously, but lots of open source projects do the same thing. They have different tags, of course, but the ecosystem wants you to join. You should want to join as well, because I promise you'll learn something. It's such a rewarding experience, and by its very definition, it doesn't cost anything except for your time and aspiration. You know, so do that. You'll get a free crash course in learning different things, or go to a startup. Like this is the thing. I think startups are interesting because they're horrible work environments a lot of times, right? They're not. I don't recommend them for. Like you go there knowing it's gonna suck. That's what you got to do. Unless you're already on top of your game, they have a way of making you humble, you know. And I learned a lot every time I worked at a startup. I just learned a ton of different things, and you can't wear one hat at a startup, right? So it keeps you honest. It keeps you focused on production. That's the other thing is, you know, if you're gonna get into software, don't listen to me. I'm so happy to talk about objects and you know, web frameworks and this and that, but the thing that is most important in any programmer today, the one that separates the novice programmer from the really senior programmers, isn't that they've just written more code, although I suppose there's some of that. It's that they have a focus on delivering into production. They want to get software out the door. And so if you go in there and you say, how do I build software? That's not the right question, right? Writing software isn't interesting. Anybody can build an app that talks to a database. You know, that's not the thing that's really scary. Focus on getting software that's into production, that's going to survive the deluge of traffic. It's going to be observable. It's going to be scalable if needed. You know, focus on production. It's so important. It'll you know, change your approach to software. Writing curly brackets is just not the hard part. I promise you.
Yeah, is not the hard part.
Yeah, no, Hello World can do. Everybody can do that. So everything Josh said, plus only code in production is valuable code. That is my personal opinion. So you really. So here's another take. If you are not brave enough, don't feel like working with a lot of people, find your personal project. Find something that you want to solve with technology or programming, right? And this is kind of how I always learn new things. So I bought like a stack of books or like most of that stuff's free for online somewhere on Red Hat Developers Program, for example. You can get like a bunch of ebooks getting you started on all kinds of technologies. But the most important part is you just need to get started with something that is close to your heart. So really want to like understand the problem, challenge, try to find a way to implement that. That is a good step. If you need a little bit more mentorship, you definitely should look out for open source encouragement programs. And I'm trying to cover a lot here under one kind of term, which is probably not correct. But there's Google Summer of Code, which is a good start. There's something called Outreachy, where you can also like apply for, it's almost internships if I'm not completely mistaken. There's always plenty of opportunities with big companies like Dell, Pivotal, I don't even know what it is right now, Oracle, Red Hat. So it like you will find something mostly on their jobs websites. And as a matter of fact, most of that is remote anyway these days. And yes, the fastest way, if you feel like talking to people, engaging, and being part of a community, that is definitely finding an open source project. And as I said, doesn't have to be a framework, so you don't have to work on Quarkus, but you could, for example, work on a student project where they built something for Call for Code for IBM. So solving like water problems somewhere, or like creating humidity sensor and connect them back to some kind of backend, right? So ultimately the case doesn't matter. You need to look out for the trustworthy and freely available programs that fit your personal needs the best. And I have to admit, I'm a really bad teacher on that one, because I've always been like the guy with the books in my little corner, not talking to anybody. So it's called an autodidact, I guess. So
yeah, there is always a choice of joining a hackathon. And there are many types of hackathons where, well, you can win prizes, or your application may be able to turn into a function in a startup, or you just make friends and hone your skills. There is the Global Code Retreat happening pretty much at the end of the year, every year. That's another choice. It happens in many cities around the world. Again, it's kind of like an open source that you can interact with people from very far away. And that's also my personal experience. My career was okayish for the first 10 years. Well, I knew Java. I even jumped into PHP and came back. But it wasn't until I became an active member, an active producer of open source, where my career really took off. So for my case, it did work. For other cases, might not be as successful, or might be even more successful. And the only thing that I can say is just give it a try. Perhaps it's the thing for you. And you will never know where you're going to get. It's kind of like the Forrest Gump thingy. Life is like a box of chocolates. The same thing with open source. You have no clue where this thing is going to take you. But like Marcus said, start with something that is close to your heart, because the thing that you have the passion for is the thing that will keep you working on it and thinking about it and come up with a different solution. If you pick up a project that you don't use so much, or then you will quickly drop it off. I can tell you immediately, there won't be much interest working on it. But if it's something that affects you directly, or your direct community, then that's something that will help you keep the drive on.
And there's so many variants. I just was reminded about one of my coworkers who built an open DJ project. So it's basically like a Spotify that you can like dump MP3s into, and like mix them and create playlists and stuff. And all this is just meant to like entertain people and use it on parties, like have real business value, because it is in production. But it also is like, this is a way to learn new technologies, right? So find this bit. That's crucial.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think we come to an end. Thank you guys, because we've been discussing. We'll like keep it like for 60 minutes. Is for all our time. I know Andres have like a meeting, just all running for like many other virtual meeting, or like business or community. And then like, thank you guys, and I really hope to see you very soon physically. And of course, always working on the 𝗏𝗏 Morocco program committee, everything. So we hope like to work together for the next edition to ship like the best contents. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Can't
you.
wait. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Badr, for the invitation, and everybody else for joining us today.
Yeah.
And
Hello.
stay healthy, everybody.
Salut, Amin.